A girl stands before a mirror, her golden braids shining like quiet rebellion. A teacher watches. A mother fights battles she doesn't yet know are hers. And in a world where silence protects the powerful, one act will make the whole nation listen. The copper bells of St. Aldrich Academy chime at 7:45 a.m., summoning 300 students into ritual. Black blazers, pressed white shirts, ties knotted at precise angles. The school is a machine that produces conformity as its primary export. Mrs. Harriet Collins stands at the entrance, observing. She's 58, with silver hair twisted into a severe bun and eyes that catalog imperfection like a detective searching for crime. Inside classroom 4B, Leona Reid sits in the third row, her golden trancados gleaming under fluorescent light. She's 13, articulate beyond her years, with the kind of intelligence that makes some teachers uncomfortable and others protective. Her mother, Amelia Reid, wove these braids last Sunday while they watched a documentary about the Black Panthers, a quiet act of resistance. Disguised as a mother's love, Mrs. Collins enters and the room shifts. She teaches history but behaves like she's guarding a sacred vault. Her lectures are meticulous, her standards unforgiving. What no one discusses is the way she pauses longer when looking at certain students, the way her praise comes easier to fair-haired children, the way her disappointment settles deeper on others. Leona raises her hand during a discussion about civil disobedience. Her answer is thoughtful, layered, the kind that makes classmates lean forward. Mrs. Collins nods curtly. Adequate, she says, which from her means excellence. Then her eyes drop to Leona's hair and something flickers, not anger, something quieter and more corrosive. Judgment. The school's code of appearance exists in printed form, 3 pages of specifications. Hair should be neat, conservative, and reflective of institutional values. No one had ever questioned what that meant until Leona arrived with styles that celebrated her heritage. Other girls had worn highlights, had experimented with cuts. They'd received gentle reminders. With Leona, something was different. At lunch, Leona sits with Marcus, a scholarship student from Moss Side, and Yuki, a Japanese-British girl whose parents donated the new science wing. Marcus notices things. He watches Mrs. Collins watch Leona across the cafeteria, notebook in hand, as if documenting a violation. She's got it out for you, Marcus says, not unkindly. He's learned to read institutional racism the way some people read weather patterns. She's got it out for everyone, Leona replies, but her voice carries doubt. She's a child trying to be an adult in spaces designed to diminish her. That afternoon, Amelia works in her office in Manchester City Centre. The walls are lined with case files, discrimination lawsuits, employment tribunals, human rights violations meticulously documented. She's the kind of lawyer who doesn't just win cases. She changes systems. Her secretary mentions that the school's administrator called something about a disciplinary matter. Amelia makes a note to follow up. It's routine. She doesn't know yet that routine will shatter. The final bell rings at 3:15 p.m. Students pour out like water breaking a dam. Leona collects her blazer, her books, her carefully maintained composure. Mrs. Collins stands by the door, watching. There's something in her expression that suggests she's been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in her mind the way some people practice confrontations they know are coming. Leona, she says quietly. A word. The girl turns. Behind her, Marcus hesitates, then keeps walking. In moments like these, solidarity becomes complicated by fear. Mrs. Collins closes the classroom door. The room suddenly feels smaller. Your parents should understand that St. Aldrich isn't just a school. It's an institution with standards. Traditions matter. They create excellence. She pauses, letting the implication breathe. I want you to think about whether you're truly committed to those standards. Leona's voice is steady, though something inside her trembles. My hair is clean. It's neat. I don't understand what the problem is. Mrs. Collins smiles, the kind of smile that predates the moment it appears in a smile prepared in advance. Tomorrow, she says, I'd like to see with a more appropriate style. Please ensure it reflects the values we uphold here. Leona nods, not understanding that she's being warned before a storm. She walks home through Manchester's grey streets, her golden braids catching the autumn light. She doesn't know that tomorrow will mark the day everything changes, or that a video camera in a student's backpack will capture the moment when an institution's true face is finally revealed. That evening, Amelia makes tea while Leona does homework. They don't discuss the call from school. Leona asks about her mother's cases, and Amelia talks about a discrimination suit she just won. People count on us to speak up, Amelia says, stirring honey into her cup. When we don't, we're complicit in their silence. She doesn't know she's preparing her daughter and herself for a choice that's already approaching. Leona looks at her mother, brilliant and fearless, and feels the weight of inherited strength. She should speak about Mrs. Collins's warning. She doesn't. Instead, she returns to her homework, braids untouched, gold still gleaming. In the architecture of obedience, even children learn to build their own prisons. Morning arrives with the precision St. Aldrich demands. Leona stands before her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. She considers taking out the braids, replacing them with something appropriate. Her mother appears in the doorway with coffee, sensing something unspoken. "You okay?" Amelia asks, the question casual but the attention absolute. Leona lies. "Fine, just tired." She's learned that small deceptions protect the people we love from worrying. She begins unbraiding her hair and Amelia watches, something shifting in her awareness. At school, Leona arrives with her hair partially rebraided but looser, some of the golden microbed ornamentation removed. Mrs. Collins observes from across the corridor and says nothing, which is somehow worse than speaking. The silence carries approval and threat simultaneously. During third period, Mrs. Collins distributes information about a project, a multimedia examination of fashion and institutional control throughout history. Students will research how institutions use appearance as a mechanism of socialization, she explains, her words carrying layers of meaning. The assignment seems innocuous. It's not. She divides students into groups, deliberately pairing Marcus with the head of the student council, whose father is a prominent conservative MP, and Leona with Thomas Whitmore, a 15-year-old who spends his free time filming. Thomas has been collecting footage for a documentary about St. Aldrich's disciplinary practices, nothing formal, just a personal project exploring the school's unspoken hierarchies. Leona doesn't know this. What she knows is that Mrs. Collins is watching her with an expression of patient inevitability, like someone waiting for a specific moment. Lunch comes. Leona sits alone, picking at her sandwich. The cafeteria's energy shifts when Amelia's office calls the school, asking to speak with the headmaster about a billing discrepancy. It's nothing, a misunderstanding, but word travels. Teachers begin noting which parents are powerful, which ones matter. Mrs. Collins hears about the call and her jaw tightens. In the staff room, she mentions Leona to Mr. Peterson, the PE teacher, a younger man who's still learning the school's unspoken codes. The girl's brilliant academically, Mrs. Collins says, but she seems resistant to our culture. I worry she's setting a precedent that undermines discipline. Mr. Peterson, uncomfortable but eager to fit in, nods. He doesn't question. He'll learn later, much later, that this moment was the first brick in a wall of institutional complicity. The final class is history. Mrs. Collins enters with an air of purpose. She's dressed differently today, more formally, as if preparing for an occasion. She has, though no one knows it yet. She's preparing for the moment she believes she's been hired to facilitate. The enforcement of invisible hierarchies through visible punishment. Before we begin, she announces, I need to address the matter of institutional standards. Fashion is never neutral, it's political. It's a statement of values. She looks directly at Leona. Some styles suggest a rejection of community. They prioritize individual expression over collective harmony. The classroom quiets. Students sense something arriving. Leona's chest tightens. She wonders if she should have removed the remaining gold beads. She didn't. She wore them as her mother wore them, like quiet resistance, like love. Mrs. Collins stands. Leona, come here, please. The girl rises, moving slowly, as if moving slowly might change what's about to happen. Around her, friends watch. Marcus is in a different class. Doesn't know. Mrs. Collins produces a hair clipper, standard equipment from the school's art program, used in projects about texture and removal and loss. I think, she says, her voice calm and clinical, it would be instructive for everyone to understand that institutional standards aren't optional. What happens next occurs in fragments, in sensory snapshots that will be replayed in courtrooms and media studios and living rooms across the nation. The sound, a mechanical worry. The image, gold braids falling onto linoleum floor like currency no one recognizes. The feeling, Leona's face still, frozen, learning in real time that institutions protect themselves through humiliation. 15 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. Mrs. Collins works methodically, removing not just braids but something else. A girl's sense of safety in space is meant to educate her. When it's finished, Leona's head is partially bare, uneven, raw. She doesn't cry. She's learned already that tears are a luxury available only to people society wants to protect. She stands silent while classmates watch, some horrified, some confused. One, Tom, is recording on his phone without being consciously aware he's doing it. Mrs. Collins steps back, brushing hair from her sleeve. You can return to your seat, Leona. And everyone remember that our rules exist for a reason. They create community. They create excellence. The class resumes as if nothing happened. They're studying civil disobediences, the irony so thick it's almost visible. Leona sits, hand on her head, feeling exposed in ways she doesn't have language for. When the final bell rings, she doesn't run. She walks calmly to her locker, calmly gathers her things, calmly exits the building. It's only in the car when she sees herself in the rearview mirror that she falls apart, her devastation meeting an intensity that will echo through institutional corridors for years to come. Amelia receives the call while reviewing a discrimination case. The headmaster's voice is controlled, professional. There's been an incident. Your daughter is fine. Perhaps you might come collect her early. The vagueness itself is a warning. Parents are only called when something is broken. The drive to Manchester feels both instant and eternal. Amelia's mind catalogues possibilities, runs through scenarios, none of them adequate for what she's about to discover. She finds Leona in the headmaster's office, sitting in a chair that seems too large for her, staring at nothing. The girl's head is patchy, uneven, exposed. For a moment, Amelia can't process what she's seeing. Then she understands, and the understanding moves through her like an electrical current. Disbelief, then anger, then a kind of focused fury that transforms her face into something her daughter barely recognizes. The headmaster begins explaining. Mrs. Collins felt disciplinary action was necessary regarding code violations. The incident was educational in nature, a teaching moment about institutional standards. Your daughter wasn't harmed. It will grow back. He speaks as if hair is the issue, as if this is about appearance rather than violence. Amelia stands without standing, her presence expanding to fill the room. Get me Mrs. Collins, now. She's never raised her voice, but her tone carries such authority that the headmaster reaches for his phone immediately. Within minutes, Mrs. Collins appears, composed, almost serene. She's rehearsed her defense. She hasn't anticipated Amelia. You cut my daughter's hair, Amelia states, her voice level and therefore more devastating than any yelling could be. Without consent, without parental permission, while she was a minor in your institutional care. Mrs. Collins remains calm. The Code of Appearance clearly outlines expectations. I was enforcing school policy. You assaulted a child, Amelia says quietly. That's what you did. That's what this is. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've handled over 200 discrimination cases. I can see this one from here. The headmaster interjects. Let's not escalate. Escalate? Amelia turns to him. You haven't seen escalation. She looks at Leona. Get your things. We're leaving. In the car, Leona watches her mother drive, watching her hands grip the wheel, watching her jaw work as she processes. Finally, Amelia reaches over and touches her daughter's patchy head gently, as if touch itself is a form of language. This, Amelia says, was not your fault. Do you understand? Nothing you did, nothing you wore, nothing you are deserved this. The fault is theirs. The shame is theirs. Leona nods, not believing, but grateful for her mother's refusal to accept the narrative that she's responsible for the violence committed against her. That evening, Amelia contacts her office. She works with 3 colleagues, David Chun, a constitutional lawyer, Sarah Okonkwo, a human rights specialist, and Richard Matthews, a PR strategist who's seen how public opinion can reshape institutions. She calls an emergency meeting. She shows them the school's code of appearance. She explains what Mrs. Collins did. David pulls up case law, the legal precedents for institutional discrimination. Sarah begins researching similar incidents, finding a pattern: girls of color, natural hair, violations that never happened to white students. This is precedent setting, David says. We can fight this legally, but the real power is in narrative. If we frame this correctly, we're not just defending one child. We're interrogating institutional racism disguised as tradition. Richard nods. The video, he says. Has anyone mentioned video? None of them knew, but within hours Thomas's footage appears online, grainy but undeniable. The video shows Mrs. Collins methodically removing Leona's braids while the girl stands silent, the class watching. The internet begins as a whisper, then becomes a roar. By midnight, #silence is complicit is trending on Twitter. Manchester Evening News has already called for a statement. BBC producers are discussing coverage. What was meant to be hidden institutional racism, the casual violence of standards, is suddenly visible. Amelia sits with Leona, watching her daughter sleep, finally, fitfully. She touches the girl's patchy head and makes a promise she'll spend years honoring. No one will silence her daughter's story. No institution will erase this. And the world will have to see what happens when a mother refuses to let injustice hide behind tradition. Aldrich Academy's administrative offices occupy the school's oldest wing, all dark wood and portraits of headmasters past. The headmaster, Mr. Gregory Thornton, is 62, a man who's spent his entire career maintaining the school's reputation. He's not cruel by intention. He's simply never questioned whether maintaining reputation sometimes requires tolerating cruelty. The video has changed that calculus entirely. By 6 a.m., he's received 17 emails from governors, parents, and journalists. The school's communications director, Patricia Webb, a woman who usually manages newsletters and event invitations, is suddenly managing a crisis. She suggests immediate damage control, a statement expressing regret, a commitment to review policies, an emphasis on Mrs. Collins's isolated actions. But before they can release anything, the BBC calls requesting an interview. Then Sky News. Then The Guardian, which publishes an investigative piece titled "The Color of Authority Examining the School's Discipline History." The article unearths something no one anticipated, a pattern. Students of color receive disproportionate disciplinary actions. Black girls specifically have faced restrictions on natural hairstyles for years, subtle, cumulative, systematic. Mrs. Collins, meanwhile, has lawyered up. Her solicitor, Jeffrey Andrews, a 55-year-old man who's defended institutions his entire career, advises her to issue no public statement. She should stick to professional judgment narratives, emphasize her 23 years of unblemished service, suggest that her actions have been misinterpreted. The strategy is to wait for the news cycle to shift. It rarely works in cases where video evidence exists. At her home in Wilmslow, Mrs. Collins tells her husband, "This is madness. I was enforcing rules. That girl's hair was disruptive." Her husband, a retired accountant who's learned not to engage deeply with her professional judgments, makes tea and says nothing. But internally, he's troubled. His daughter works in diversity recruitment for a tech company. She's told him stories about institutions like the one his wife has served for decades. He hasn't known how to bridge that gap between his wife's worldview and a world changing around her. Leona doesn't go to school. Amelia keeps her home while the case begins moving through legal channels. But Leona watches the news, follows Twitter, sees her own head, half-shaved, vulnerable, becoming iconic. It's strange being made into a symbol while still being just a child with a patchy head and a confusion of emotions. David Chun files formal complaints with the Education Authority and the police. Sarah begins coordinating with other families. There are, it turns out, 7 girls over the past decade who've had similar experiences at St. Aldrich, though none were as publicly visible. Each story, when told, adds weight to something larger than one incident. Richard coordinates media strategy. He suggests that Amelia do an interview, but only when she's ready. And not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as an advocate seeking change. He coaches her on messaging. This isn't about one teacher or one school. It's about systems that have protected discrimination for generations by calling it tradition. Marcus notices Leona's absence from school. He's a sophomore in a place where noticing things is dangerous. Noticing means you might be asked to take sides, and sides have consequences. But he can't stay silent. During lunch, he approaches Yuki. "Did you see the video?" he asks. Yuki has. She's watched it multiple times. Felt her own uncomfortable recognition of moments she'd experienced differently, moments that had felt like expectations rather than violations. "We should do something," she says. "Like what?" Marcus responds. But they both know. They start a petition. They gather signatures from students who are tired of invisible rules, who sense that institutions work hardest to protect themselves when they're most exposed. By Thursday, 3 teachers have called for Mrs. Collins' suspension. Mr. Peterson, the PE teacher from the staff room conversation, is among them. He did some research after the video emerged, examined his own behavior, and felt the full weight of complicity. He emails the headmaster. "I believe Mrs. Collins' actions violated not just school policy, but basic principles of student safety and dignity. I can no longer remain silent." His email helps shift the narrative. When teachers refuse to defend a colleague, even silently, the institution's defenses crack. The headmaster, under pressure, does what institutions do. He acts dramatically to minimize actual change. He announces Mrs. Collins is temporarily suspended pending investigation. He commits to a comprehensive review of disciplinary policies. He brings in a diversity consultant for a 1-day training. None of these actions address the systemic architecture that produced the moment, but they're theatrical enough to suggest action, which is sometimes enough to satisfy public scrutiny. What no one anticipated is Amelia's next move. She holds a press conference not outside the school but inside a community center in Manchester's multicultural heart. She sits with Leona, whose hair is now being grown back in pride rather than shame. She speaks not as a victim seeking compensation, but as a mother recognizing that her daughter's experience is shared by hundreds of families. "This is about more than hair," Amelia says, her voice carrying through the room and into broadcast networks nationwide. "This is about a system designed to regulate the bodies, the expressions, the very existence of children who don't fit predetermined molds. My daughter didn't violate any rule. She existed in a way that made someone uncomfortable, and they tried to erase that existence. We will not allow that erasure. The soundbite spreads faster than anything before it. #refuse. Silence begins circulating. Leona's face, not just the aftermath, but her resilience becomes shorthand for a conversation a nation suddenly can't avoid. Detective Inspector Sarah Hammond receives the case report on a Friday morning. She's been with Manchester Police for 23 years and has handled discrimination cases before. But this one carries public attention that requires precision. She begins with the obvious. Interview Mrs. Collins and the students who witnessed the incident. Mrs. Collins's account differs subtly from the video. She describes the clipping as educational demonstration, using language that suggests Leona consented somehow. The video shows no consent. Mrs. Collins's solicitor advises her to claim emotional distress, suggesting she's being victimized by misinterpretation. The strategy suggests how justice systems protect people who commit institutional violence. Thomas Whitmore is interviewed as the videographer. He's nervous, part of him had wanted this exposure, but now facing police it feels different. He's 15 and holding evidence of something he didn't initially understand he was documenting. Sarah Hammond treats him gently, which helps him articulate what he observed. Mrs. Collins wasn't angry. That was the weird thing. She was calm, like she decided before it happened, like it was already a plan. His observation provides context different from what the video alone offers. It suggests premeditation, which changes the legal categorization from excessive discipline to potential assault. Hammond makes notes, knowing that the police investigation will inevitably be political. She's thorough anyway because her daughter is black and wears her hair naturally, and there's no way to separate professional duty from personal recognition in cases like this. The school administrator with whom Leona first spoke, Mrs. Janet Wilkins, who'd initially suggested discretion, reaches out to Amelia's office. She's in her mid-60s, has been at the school for longer than most teachers, and has watched institutional racism operate through bureaucratic channels for decades. She wants to provide additional statements, correcting earlier characterizations of events. She'd told the headmaster to suspend Mrs. Collins immediately. He'd chosen to hesitate. Now she's choosing to act. Her statement to police includes information the school had tried containing. Mrs. Collins had made similar comments about multiple students' hair over years. There were written complaints from families who'd been discouraged from pursuing formal action. The pattern was an incident. It's policy operating through individuals. Mrs. Wilkins had wanted to report it years ago but had been subtly discouraged by previous administrators. Now she's old enough that consequences feel less frightening than silence. Simultaneously, Sarah Okonkwo discovers something else. The school's archives, stored in the basement but accessible through FOIA requests, contain correspondence about hair policy dating back decades. Early iterations explicitly referenced African-style hair as incompatible with institutional standards. These phrases had been removed from recent policy versions, but the archive demonstrates intent. The discrimination hadn't evolved. It had just become subtler. Richard Matthews uses this information strategically. Rather than merely defending Leona's case, they begin reframing the entire narrative. This isn't new, this is systemic. The school had operated discriminatory policy. Mrs. Collins was just the most visible actor in a much older machinery. Leona's schoolmates rally unexpectedly. The petition Marcus and Yuki started has over 2,000 signatures. More significantly, several white students from wealthy families, students whose families donate to the school and hold power within it, begin publicly supporting Leona. Their voices carry institutional weight in ways that might shift outcomes. One of these students is Sophie Ashworth Clark, daughter of a prominent Tory MP. Sophie wasn't close to Leona but had observed the event from a back row seat. She'd felt something shift inside her during that moment, a recognition that she'd been complicit in systems she'd never questioned. Now she's speaking to journalists, answering questions about the weird vibes around her friend's hair. Mr. Peterson, the PE teacher, continues his internal revolution. He approaches other staff members, asking them directly, "What would you do if it was your child?" Some respond defensively. Others recognize themselves. The staff becomes fractured, not openly, but notably. There's a fault line now between people who saw something wrong and people who are invested in institutional preservation. The headmaster finds himself leading a school increasingly divided against itself. He holds emergency meetings with governors, suggesting they move quickly on reforms to prevent further reputational damage. But reform without accountability is merely theater, and the burden or pressure from public opinion and media scrutiny becomes demanding, Mrs. Collins Suspension hardens into a formal investigation. Her legal team leaks information suggesting she's being sacrificed for systemic failures, that her actions were reasonable enforcement of existing policy. But the video contradicts this narrative continuously. There's no way to defend what's recorded. Amelia, watching this unfold, feels something complex. She wanted accountability, and it's arriving. But she also watches a woman's life disassemble and recognizes that while Mrs. Collins acted with prejudice, she was also enabled by structures much older than her. Understanding this doesn't diminish her responsibility, but it complicates judgment. She tells Leona justice isn't about destroying individuals, it's about changing systems. We want Mrs. Collins held accountable. But we also want St. Aldrich and every school like it to stop producing people who believe that humiliation is discipline. Leona, processing loss and vindication simultaneously, nods. She's becoming wise beyond what a 13-year-old should have to become. The formal inquiry begins in a conference room at the Education Authority's offices. Mrs. Collins sits with Jeffrey Andrews, her solicitor. Amelia sits with David Chun. Sarah Okonkwo attends as an observer. The headmaster's present, representing the school. The atmosphere is formal, procedural, designed to drain passion from proceedings, which is exactly what institutions prefer. Mrs. Collins, under questioning, maintains her position. She was enforcing rules. Leona's hair violated policy. The removal was educationally justifiable. When confronted with the video's timeline showing no warning, no opportunity for alternative compliance, she hesitates. Andrews instructs her not to answer further. David Chun presents the archive documents showing decades of discriminatory language. He presents Thomas's testimony about premeditation. He presents Mrs. Wilkins's statement corroborating a pattern. The inquiry's focus gradually shifts from was discipline appropriate to was discrimination occurring, and was it systematic? By day 3, the headmaster essentially admits that policy language had been sanitized in recent years precisely because earlier versions would have revealed explicit racial targeting. He frames this as modernization rather than cover-up, but the distinction disappears under scrutiny. The inquiry's preliminary findings take 3 weeks. When they're released, they're unambiguous. Mrs. Collins's actions constitute discriminatory harassment. The school's policy regime, while officially neutral, was designed and deployed in racially disparate ways. The institution knew this, tolerated it, and took minimal action. Mrs. Collins will be fired, not suspended. The school faces substantial fines and mandated reforms. But more significantly, the inquiry generates a document that becomes national policy precedent. Subsequent guidance to all English schools explicitly states that natural hair cannot be regulated through appearance codes, that institutional standards cannot require students to alter their bodies, and that racial discrimination disguised as tradition violates fundamental student protections. St. Aldrich Academy is forced into public rehabilitation. New diversity officers are hired. The curriculum is restructured to genuinely examine institutional racism rather than merely reference it. Crucially, the school hires Janet Wilkins as associate headmaster specifically to oversee cultural change. She becomes the adult who finally asked, "What would you do if it was your child?" and changed policy accordingly. Mrs. Collins, for her part, faces more than firing. She receives a criminal caution for assault, which appears on permanent records affecting future employment. Her teaching certification is revoked. She becomes unemployable in educational environments. It's a complete professional destruction, which feels proportionate until one considers that she's also a human being whose life is disassembled in public view. She gives one interview to a sympathetic journalist in which she expresses confusion. "I taught for 23 years without incident. I was enforcing policy. I'm being destroyed for policies I didn't create." She's not entirely wrong, but also entirely missing the point that institutions destroy people every day through enforcing policy, and sometimes the destruction of those policies requires destroying those who enforce them most visibly. Amelia watches this denouement with complicated recognition. She won. Leona won. But the victory tastes like consequences, like the weight of someone else's unmade future. She doesn't apologize for the outcome, but she also doesn't celebrate. Instead, she focuses on what comes next: systemic change. Real change, not performance. The school establishes a fund supporting students of color in educational environments. It hosts community learning sessions. It creates genuine accountability mechanisms. But more importantly, it becomes a case study in how institutions can transform, not quickly, not painlessly, but genuinely. Leona returns to school, and the experience is different. Not perfect. Institutions don't transform entirely, but notably different. Teachers watch themselves more carefully. Disciplinary processes have oversight. The invisible rules become visible, examined. often rejected. More girls arrive at St. Aldrich with their hair in natural styles. Some braids are kept, some are altered, but none are forced. The choice becomes the point. Students own their own bodies, their own presentations, their own existence within institutional spaces. 6 months later, Leona's hair has fully regrown. Her braids are gold-tinged again, microbed ornaments visible, celebrated rather than corrected. She walks through St. Aldrich's corridors with a presence that's neither defiant nor ashamed. Simply present. Simply herself. This might seem insignificant. It's revolutionary. Marcus and Yuki have become genuinely important in ways that the incident made possible. They formed something called the Student Accountability Council, meeting with administration monthly to discuss policy implementation and student experiences. It's bureaucratic and unglamorous, which is exactly why it works. Thomas Whitmore is considering a career in documentary filmmaking. His video of Mrs. Collins taught him something about the power of visual testimony. He's developing a longer project examining institutional discrimination across multiple schools, using video interviews and archival evidence. It's ambitious for a 15-year-old, but he has mentorship from Amelia's office, from journalists who covered the case, from institutions suddenly invested in accountability. Sophie Ashworth Clark's evolution troubles her father, a conservative politician whose daughter has become increasingly critical of institutional power structures. She's applying to universities specifically because they're known for social justice coursework. The family arguments are sharp, but she's committed to recognizing how privilege had made her complicit in structures she'd never questioned. The legal team dissolved amicably. David Chun took on more discrimination cases nationally. The St. Aldrich precedent had opened doors. Sarah Okonkwo was recruited to work with the Education Authority on nationwide policy development. Richard Matthews began specializing in institutional advocacy, helping organizations tell stories of transformation rather than merely crisis management. Mrs. Collins moved to a coastal town, seeking quiet. She works occasionally as a private tutor, but largely remains removed from educational environments. She hasn't apologized publicly, though she sent a brief letter to Leona, expressing regret for causing distress. Leona didn't respond, but Amelia kept the letter. Forgiveness is complicated. It doesn't require friendship. It requires something harder: the recognition that humans are simultaneously individuals and products of systems, capable of cruelty and change, destruction and potential rehabilitation. Amelia was invited to speak at educational conferences, to contribute to policy development, to appear on panels about institutional accountability. She began a nonprofit focused on educational justice, training young lawyers to pursue cases like Leona's. She also slowed down slightly, spending more time with her daughter, understanding that the case had extracted cost. Leona's childhood had been nationally examined, her trauma made public. Leona herself is processing differently than either parent might expect. She's not traumatized into activism or optimized into career ambition. She's simply a teenager who experienced violence, survived it publicly, and is now learning who she is beyond that definition. She has good days and harder ones. She has moments when she feels empowered by the outcome and moments when she just wants to have been a kid who wasn't violated on camera. She's requested psychological support, which the school properly reformed provides without resistance. Her therapist, Dr. Amanda Williams, is excellent, particularly because she refuses to make Leona's trauma meaningful or redemptive. It was wrong. She survived it. Now she's living. Those facts don't need spiritual packaging. The school itself has become something of a model, not perfect, but genuinely transformed. Media regularly covers the St. Aldrich story as example of institutional accountability, which is both helpful and exhausting. The school is more than the incident that changed it, but the incident is what changed it. New students arrive each year, some of them specifically attracted to the school because of its reform policies. They're seeking environments where they won't be humiliated for existing. The fact that they now find such environments represents systemic change, however incomplete. 1 year after the incident, St. Aldrich Academy hosts a symposium titled Institutional Accountability and Educational Justice. Representatives from schools nationwide attend, along with students, parents, advocacy groups, and journalists. The goal is to take lessons learned from one case and translate them into actionable framework for other institutions. Leona doesn't speak at the symposium. She's chosen to step back from public visibility, and her choice is respected, but her presence matters. She attends with Amelia, observing, confirming through her attendance that change has actually occurred rather than merely been promised. Janet Wilkins presents data showing disciplinary disparities have decreased significantly across the school. The number of subjective offenses has declined. No more charges of disruptive hair or inappropriate presentation. Standards became objective and applied universally. White boys with hair covering ears aren't penalized, so black girls with natural hair aren't penalized. Simple principle, massive institutional transformation. David Chun presents the new policy framework Adopt. If this story moved you, don't let it fade into silence. Share it, talk about it. Question the systems that still define who gets to belong. Because every time one voice is silenced, the world loses a truth it needed to hear. Comment below, do you believe silence protects peace or power?